So hello everyone, good to see you all here, and I guess we can start while we are still having some people joining in. But yeah, so thank you for joining our first international webinar today. Before we get to the topic of the day, I will just quickly introduce you a little bit about CONSTRUCTIVE. Can I please ask for the next slide? So yeah, CONSTRUCTIVE is a platform for sharing experience among professionals in construction industry. On this platform, we are working to bring together industry best practices and expert knowledge because we believe that together we can contribute to the development of the construction industry. And in addition to organizing webinars such as today, this will be the next slide, and trainings for companies, we also provide engineering consultancy and legal services. In the next slide, you can see also our law firm Juris Consultus, founded in 2008, working specifically on construction process matters. We also collaborate with universities on research and scientific publications, as well as with the public sector, creating educational content in local media. Well, in general, you can, of course, find out more about us and our services on our website and social media platforms. So make sure you follow us on LinkedIn or other platforms as you prefer, because there will be a lot of interesting webinars coming up in near future as we expand our activities also outside of Latvia. But today's main speaker, of course, is our webinar host, Yuting Chen, who is a senior lecturer and program director of construction project management in London, as well as a researcher with an extensive experience. And I'm sure she will introduce herself a bit more in a moment. So the floor is yours, Yuting, and thank you for being us today and sharing your insights with us.
Thank you for the introductions, and nice to meet you, everyone online. And this is a bit of a self-introduction from my side. I got my background, PhD degree in construction project management, and I also have the background in international business law and financial analysis. I normally will share this knowledge wherever I go, because when I was doing my PhD, and I also used the opportunity to interview the industry people and find the body of knowledge they are looking for from their candidates, which I found include the construction and then financial analysis and the legal background. I'm also the founder and director of Info Mega Limited consulting company. So we have a lot of collaborations with the Chinese main contractors. Even though I'm now working in London South Bank University, but I think it's slightly different from the others. All my degrees has been got in China, so that's where we normally collaborate with the Chinese state-owned companies. I'm a senior lecturer in construction project management in London South Bank University, and also the program director. My research has always been related to contract management, dispute resolution, and I really hope that today's webinar is going to be a collaboration, a discussion related to the topic in the contract management in construction projects. And that is my email address. If you have any questions or you want to collaborate or connect after the webinar, please feel free to email me, or you can find me on LinkedIn as well. This is a structure for today's webinar. The topic is related to contract. So we will go through the definition of the contract as the beginning. The second is, why do we need a contract at all? Because we tend to have the habit and use the contract from the beginning. The third topic will be, why is a contract incomplete all the time? Then the fourth topic will be how to measure a contract. Whenever we say, oh, this contract is well written, what do we mean by saying that? The fifth top will be the natural language processing in the contract management. I don't think none of us in this webinar have not heard of ChatGPT or natural language processing recently, especially since 2021. Then the last one will be a little bit share of our research result and the distributions of the contract document based on the data we have collected. Just to clarify before I start, a lot of the research result I'm going to share in this webinar is a collaboration with the Chen University, where I got my PhD degrees. So let's from the first one, which is what is a contract? I know that it might be harder to have the discussion when it is webinar. So please feel free to write your comments while the chat if you want to engage, or I can get back to the topic or questions later after we finish. So at the end, we will go through all of the questions and discussions. I have, as a researcher, doing defining a terminology and the concept is the first thing we do. So before we go to a bit more detail about the contract, let's have a look of the definition. Some of the resources related to contract management have defined the contract as agreement giving rise to the parties and also giving rise to obligations to both of the party. And also these obligations are enforced or recognized by law. So some of the other definition, very similar type, would define a contract as a legally enforceable agreement. So in that sense, it is harder to find some oral agreement as legally enforceable. So this is something I want to raise, which is when we choose the definition of a certain concept or a terminology, then based on that definition, it is some of the definition might clarify it as a contract, but some of the definition may not. Let's have a look of the second category of the definition of the contract. So they define the contract as a contract refers to devices for conducting exchanges. So in that sense, it's not necessary to be written in the contract document. So for example, if you're dealing with a contracting party, you trust very well, you have been dealing the transactions with each other for a very long time, then maybe just an oral agreement so that you will deliver this equipment to me and I will pay the money, say 1 week later. So this is simply, by this definition, also a contract, even though it is not written in the contract document. However, let's get back to the previous definition, which is a legally enforceable agreement. There is no legal duty for two parties to enter into such agreement. However, if the party choose to do so, it will give rise to the legal obligations, which means if you breach it, it will have the consequence after this. So there are two ways of looking at the contract. So one way is that it brings the legal regulations, and if you breach it, it will cause a serious sequence of the result after. However, the second category of the definition only refer to the devices for conducting exchanges. And the reasons for why we're looking at in this way is because, well, it only in modern nowadays we have the contract arranging. However, before we have this contract document written, we still have the exchanges between the two parties. So that's another way to define contract. I think the one we now use more often in our daily construction life will be the first one, even though the second category also have been used. Well, this is an example of the composure of the this is from physics. I think everyone is familiar with this in this webinar. And based on physics, there are priorities of the document. So this is the reason for why we have the priority of the document. Very clear stated in the very beginning of the document is because we try to avoid the contradictory between or among the documents inside one contract document. So these are an example, and this is also the different clauses specified in the general conditions. I think everyone, I will pass through this a bit faster. I think everyone is familiar with FIDIC and the content in it. The second part of the webinar is that why do we need a contract at all? Well, I think everyone have your own answers already. But then before I share my opinions on this, a few of the questions to think before we jump into why do we need a contract at all? Well, I have asked these series of the question inside my classroom and get very interesting answers and results from my students. So the first one is, imagine that you are going to get married and your partner all of a sudden wants to sign a contract with you before the marriage, just to clarify the financial situations between you two, and then go through the detail what will happen if, just in case, divorce happens in the future. How are you two going to arrange the financial situations? So they see the contract. Well, how would you feel if your partner asked you to sign a contract like this before the marriage? Well, I originally come from China. I think if I ask this to a Chinese, most likely they wouldn't feel very happy. However, the surprising thing here is that now I work in the higher education in the UK. Well, I wouldn't say many, but at least I can see a few of my students still say that this is necessary to sign a contract like this before the marriage. Well, some of the argument will be, why would you like to get married to someone like this if you like, what's the point? Well, I will leave the answer back to you. It's only a question for you to think, why do we need to have a contract? So second is a different scenario, is that imagine someone you trust the most in the world, and then you two are going to start a business together. Would you think it's necessary to sign a contract in this scenario as well? So it's slightly from the first one. It's not all personal relationship. Now it's also about business as well. And also, whenever we say that because I ask you to imagine the person you trust the most. So what do we mean by when we say that I trust this person? And also the final thing I would like you to think before we go to the function or the role plays by the contract is that how can we agree on something like COVID-19? No one has the ability to predict COVID-19 before the construction. How can we agree on what to do when we actually don't know what will happen in the future in the contract document? So a few things to think about, and that related to the function or the necessity of having a contract in a transaction or even in our daily life. I will introduce two theory background and also the research framework related to the function played by contract, and hopefully that will answer the question we bring for the second topic, which is why do we need a contract at all? So the first theory, it is called transaction cost theory. And before I introduce this theory by itself, I would like to introduce what this is a real story happened in American before. It is a transaction between GM, which is a car company, and Fisher, which is a manufacturing producing the car body. So the background of the story was in the beginning of their relationship or transactions, GM came to Fisher and say that because during the time GM was in the stage of growing their business, they came to Fisher and tell the CEO of the Fisher that in the coming 5 years, no matter how many car bodies your company is going to produce, I am going to buy them all. So, well, of course, they have negotiated the price in this contract. Well, regardless, let's put the price of the car body aside. But the most important thing for Fisher is no matter how many car bodies they're going to produce, it's going to be bought by GM. Well, 5 years is a really fast time, and then 5 years passed. Then GM came back to Fisher again, and they say that in the past 5 years we have been collaborating so well. So how about we write another 5 years contract, and then it's the same as before. No matter how many you are going to produce, I'm going to buy them all. Well, only one condition. Because your manufacturing, your store is quite far from mine. In order to save the transport fees, why don't you build a manufacturing just next to me? So that it can save a lot of the cost for both your side and my side, and we can share the benefits. Or if you want me to get involved in the building stage, I'm happy to do that, and we can negotiate. I can't really ask the opinions from the audience, but just imagine if you are the CEO of Fisher at this stage, and hearing an offer like this, another 5 years contract, is still, no matter how many you're going to produce. Now it's only a matter of the ability you can produce the car body. GM is still going to buy them, and it also makes sense because the cost you have spent for the transport is a waste of money for both of the party. Would you accept the offer or not? Oh, I will share the real end for the story, because that's what has really happened. So it happened at the end that Fisher refused to build this manufacturing next to GM, even though they know it's beneficial to have this. And then, well, it happens at the end that GM has bought Fisher, and the Fisher becomes one department of the GM's car company and producing the car bodies. So that's the background of the transaction cost theory. What I want. So that's the story, but then hopefully that's the background story. But then the transaction cost theory has used both the theories in economics, in the law, and in the organizational studies. So this is are the founders of the series has been borrowed by the Williams, who is the founder for the transaction cost theory. Well, having said many of the background, let's jump into the definition of the transaction cost itself. I would be guessing that whenever we do analysis for the construction project or for any other manufacturing production, the cost we used to pay attention before is normally the production cost. So say, whenever we calculate the cost for a project, what are the costs we are going to spend for the laborers, how much we are going to spend for buying the equipment, for the materials. So these are the costs linked directly to the production process itself. However, transaction cost theory, it brings our attention to some of the definition or part of the cost we have ignored before, which is the transaction cost. So the definition of this is the economic counterpart of friction between the parties in the transaction. It is called the transaction cost. Before we start any transaction, we have the cost that happens already. So for example, the cost we spend for drafting the contract, for having the negotiation meetings. So it is not related directly to the production stage. And it is, so for example, the meetings we have for the negotiation for drafting the contract, it doesn't help to really produce the construction project itself. However, it is to facilitating the transaction itself. So that's the part of the cost it is trying to look at. It is called the transaction cost. So before the transaction or before the construction project, let's say we have the cost for negotiation, we have the cost help to spend having the meetings, going through the negotiation, draft the contract, applications for passing all the regulations and stuff. And then the other part of the transaction cost is after we had the transaction. So for example, after we sign the contract, we still need to have the adaptation cost because uncertainty happens. Things are out of plan also happens as well. Renegotiation fees, or I think in the physics, we some of the attendances have been making jokes of how expensive arbitrations and these kind of stuff can be. So that is also part of the transaction cost as well. Again, so to summarize, before this series, we tend to pay attention to the production cost, which is directly linked to the producing of a service or producing of the product directly itself. However, transaction cost theory, it brings our attention to a different part of the cost happening in transaction, even though it is not directly linked to the production stage. However, it is to facilitate the transactions between the parties, and that is part called the transaction cost. And there are two assumptions used by this theory. I would like to introduce both of them because I think it is also linked to the reasons for why do we need a contract. The first assumption for this theory is called bounded rationality, which is that we are human. We, no matter how much we intendly to be rational, we only have the limited ability to do so. So for example, we can try as much as we can to write a contract as complete as possible, or we try our best. However, we still have the limited ability to do so. So that is called the bounded rationality. And the second assumption assumed by the transaction. Oh, sorry for these slides. So this slide is related to the bounded rationality. There are four different areas. I don't know whether how many of you have seen this before. So known knowns, the things we know, and known unknowns, the things we know that I don't know. I don't know how it's going to be the weather tomorrow. Unknown knowns, the intuitions that sometimes we have this feeling that I'm going to go for this one rather than that one. We know we know our opinions on this. However, we don't know the logic or the reasons behind. And the fourth category is the unknowns. So the first one is the fact we know. The second, we know we don't know is the question. And then we don't know why we know this is the intuitions we have. And the fourth category, the unknowns is something we leave for discovery. And that is also a fact to show that we are humans. We have the bounded rationality. So that's the first dimension of the assumption behind this theory. The second is the optimistic assumption from the parties. So by the definition is that we are human, we also seek the self-interest. And it is not only the self-interest seeking, but also self-interest seeking with guile, which means sometimes we share the information with each other, but you never know whether that is true or not. It might be the case they are telling something, but they are using it as a lie to seek their self-interest. So we call this as the opportunistic behavior. So these are the two dimensions. And it's not necessary that all the actions are opportunistic behavior. It is exactly because we don't know whether this time is going to be a lie or fact. It increases the cost because we need to spend the time and also efforts to identify whether this time it is an opportunistic behavior or not. So even though this person can be telling the truth, say 100 times before, it still can be the lie in this 101 time. So that's the two dimension or two assumption assumed by the transaction cost theory. What I find is interesting is it brings us two dimensions, which is that whether we have the ability and whether we have the willingness. So we have the bounded ability to really predict whether the other party is lying or not. And then the other party does have the willingness to lie, to seek for their self-interest. The other thing brings, it's also a very special dimension to look at the transaction, is called the specific asset. So this one linked to the story we shared in the beginning between the GM and Fisher. Oh, by the way, I forgot to mention Williamson has won the Nobel Prize because of his contribution. So what he had proposed here is that in the transaction, there is something called a specific asset. But if you remember the story we shared in the beginning between GM and Fisher, of course, if Fisher built a manufacturer next to GM, it will be a very good asset, beneficial for this transaction between Fisher and GM only. However, if GM want to use this asset, this manufacturing, as something as their benefits to the transaction to the other party, it has a degree to sacrifice or pay a bit more because it is closer to GM, which also means that its location is further from other possible contracting parties. So the definition of this specific asset, it has references to the degree to which an asset can be redeployed to alternative uses and by alternative user without sacrifice of the productive value in the construction specifically. So for example, if you have the equipment on the construction site already, or you have personalized some of the specific purchase for this party for your client already, it might cost you slightly more if you want to use again in the transaction with other clients. So this is a specific asset we call. A bit of the other categories of the special asset, the site specificity or physical, human asset specific. So for example, if you have some of the employees trained especially for this kind of transactions, that is called the special asset. So these three are the very important definitions and concept for the transaction cost. This is another summary for why the combination of the three leads to the conclusion that we need to use the governance, we need to use the contract. So this is a conclusion drawn by this theory, which is the transactions which differ in their attributes, and in their attributes which we have the frequency, how frequent you have this transaction with your client, how uncertainty this will be, and then the special asset you have to invest in this transaction and should be aligned with the governance structure. So what kind of contract document you should be writing in this transaction in a discriminating way. So the whole point is to save the transaction cost by writing the contract document, is to save the cost and to reduce the frictions between the parties in one transaction, or even though in a longer run. So it's it's quite different if you only have the transaction with this one party at one time only, or you have that it's going to be a longer collaborations between the parties. So the behavior will be changing as well. So this is the first one, the first reason for why we have the contract, to simply encourage both the parties to increase the special asset and also to reduce the transaction cost in a transaction. The second part is called agent theory for why we need to use the contract. This is the situation when one party is making the actions or make the decision on behalf of the other one. So for example, you have the stakeholders in a company and you have hired the CEO to make a decision for you. So for example, in the construction as well, we have the client. And however, it is the main contractor and having this construction project on site on behalf of the clients to finish the whole project. So this is called the principal agent program. And the problem behind this is, so for example, if we are the CEO of the company, and based on the contract signed between the stakeholders and the CEO, the money we get as the salary of the CEO will be depends on the performance of the company. For example, this year only. So the CEO will be only paying attention to a very short run of the company in this year specifically, rather than a longer run. However, as the stakeholder for this company, what they pay more attention to would be a longer run of running the company rather than this year only. So this is the principal agent problem. And it happens because the information asymmetry, which means the CEO always have more information about the market, about the company than the stakeholder. It's the same in the construction. The principal in this case is the client. The agent in this case is the main contractor. So the main contractor would be able to use the more information they hold on hand. So for example, what is going on the construction site, what is really out there. So they can use the more information they hold at hand to make the decisions more beneficial for the main contractor rather than the client. And that's where we have the moral hazards. It is because of the information asymmetry. One party has more information compared to the other party, and they can take the advantage of having more information because of that. And this is another one. It's also still the real case happened in American before. It's called the market for lemons. So this is the story in the second-hand car market in American. So they call lemon as something that there are lemons and there are also peach. So if they call a second car a lemon, it means the price they have paid for the car is higher than the real value of this. However, if you call something second car as a peach, it means that the value of the car is higher than the price you have paid. This is from a research and also based on a real story. It is a market for lemons, which means it is only the second-hand car with a lemon quality will be staying in the market. And that's why the case is called the market for lemons. And the reason behind this is exactly because of the information asymmetry. So say that we as the buyer, we go to the second-hand car market and trying to buy a car. And we know roughly the average price for the second-hand car, let's say 5K. And then we have the 5K in mind, and we go to the market. Imagine if you are the seller, and if a buyer offer you 5K, would you sell your car if you know your car is worth more than 5K? Of course, you wouldn't stay in the market or sell your car. However, if you are the buyer, you are the seller, and then you know your car is worth less than 5K, you would be more than happy to sell this. And that is why gradually in the market, it is the market for lemon. And because that happens because of the information asymmetry, which is the seller has more information compared to the buyer for the car's quality. So these two are the series behind the reasons for why we need to have the contract. The first one is to save the transaction cost between the parties in the transaction. The second reason is because we try to reduce the moral hazard, is try to encourage the agent to make the behaviors beneficial for both of for the principals and the agent themselves. And the other function, the other perspective of looking at the contract is to have a look of the function played by the contract. This is also a theoretical research framework proposed by our research group is Tianjin University. So there are three functions played by a contract, include controlling function, coordination function and the adaptation might be a bit abstract. Let's go to detail by using FIDIC Redbook as the example. The first dimension is called controlling function. It is, if you still remember the transaction cost theory, we have mentioned the opportunistic behavior. So these are the functions played by a contract to encourage both of the parties to fulfill their obligation specified in the contract. So for example, specifying the right allocation. And if one party breached the contract, what kind of rights given to the other party? Example in the FIDIC Redbook 1999 version, if the contractor fails to give the notice, he shall, if and when required by the employer, uncover the work and thereafter restate and make goods all at the contractor's cost. So this is to deal with a relational risk. You don't know whether this party is a party that you can trust or not. So this is one part of the function a contract can play. The second function of the contract is called coordination. So we assume that this party, they are not opportunistic party. They will not lie, that you can trust them. However, misunderstanding still happens, even though we both are very honest party. So for example, the webinar this morning, we are saying that we are going to have this 11 a.m. However, if I join at 11 a.m. in the UK time, I will be late for this webinar. So it is the second function of the contract is to simply clarify the descriptions and to have the interpretation of what do we mean, to facilitate the communication and also to interpret the agreement. An example from the FIDIC would be the contractor shall give notice to the engineering whenever the works are likely to be delayed or disrupted. So something like this is to try to interpret the agreement, try to clarify each other's expectations. The third function of the contract plays is called adaptation. It is also arise from the performance risk, and it is the resources for this kind of risk is because of the contingency. So for example, the force majeure everyone is aware of, or the COVID-19, how are we going to deal with the uncertainties or anything like this in the transaction. So to summarize, the first dimension of the function control is to deal with the relational risk. It is because of this party themselves. We don't know whether they are reliable. We don't know whether they are the other party seeking for their self-interest only. And the second dimension is that we assume, even though this party is trustworthy, we can trust them. They have really good will. However, due to the project complexity, especially in construction, and due to the uncertainties we have in our daily life, we have another two functions, coordination and adaptation, played by contract. So these are the reasons for why we need to have the contract document. The third topic for today, why is a contract incomplete? For sure. Well, there are simply two reasons behind. As we mentioned in the beginning, one assumption is we have the bounded rationality. We simply couldn't be able to make the contract as complete as possible. Even though this, I would encourage you to think that let's take that assumption away. Let's assume we are not bounded. We don't have the limitations. We have the full ability to write the contract as complete as possible or as we want. Would you still choose to do so? Well, that brings us to the second reason for why a contract is never complete. It's because it costs us massive even though we have the ability in order to write a contract as complete as we want, it still costs us a lot. It's always a balance between how much we want to spend in the beginning or before the transaction as much as it is necessary, or it's also a balance between the cost before the transaction happens in the planning stage, or we would like to take a bit of the risk and see what will happen, because it's possible that nothing happens in this transaction. It saves us a lot of cost as well. So there are two perspectives of looking at this, why a contract is never complete. The first dimension is that we don't have the ability to make the contract because we have limitations as human. Second reason, even though we don't have that limitation, we still might not choose to make the contract as complete, because it balance between the flexibility and also how much we want to spend in the planning and after the contract. The fourth topic is about how to measure a contract. So this is what our research team have been trying to do. In order to improve a contract writing, there are two questions we are trying to answer by ourselves. The first one is how to measure a contract. When we say a contract is well written for construction project, what do we mean by a well-written contract? So in order to make this judgment of whether this is a good contract or not, we need to have a evaluation system or evaluation dimension. The second is that how to make the contract more complete with less ambiguity. What we have been trying to do as a research group together is the first method we have tried is to use the questionnaire. So we simply go to the industry and ask that how do you think and how do you feel about whether this certain contract you have been using in your project, in your construction, because we only focusing on construction project, how it is written in this construction project. And then gradually we find the first method is very subjective. It is up to the opinion from this respondent. So we gradually switched from the first method to the second one, which is manually coded by the trained researcher. A bit different in China, the master student also are required to do the research as well. So we have used this theoretical framework, which I have introduced with the three functions: controlling function, coordination function, and adaptation. And for each of the dimension, we have also divided. So for example, the control function have the clauses related to the right allocation, obligations, penalties, third party to get involved for the dispute resolution. Use this theoretical framework. We have asked the researcher to manually code by them. So we train these researchers. They have the good understanding of, for example, contract document and have a good understanding of the FIDIC document. So this is manually coded by them. And as you can see by the table here, so this is the percentage of different versions of a FIDIC 1999 version, according to the three dimensions, three functions, contract play, control, coordination, adaptation. What are the percentage? And the sentence, the number for the sentences each of the version has and have. And then gradually we have noticed a disadvantage of using the manual coding method, which is, first of all, it is very much depends on the quality of the researchers we have hired. And also secondly, they have this disagreement among them as well. That's why we always use the odd number so that they can make a conclusion by themselves as well. But then that's the disadvantage of using the manual coding. Not to mention that after they graduate, we need to train another group of the researcher to do the manual coding for us. And then as everyone over here knows that hundreds of pages for the contract, it's harder to read it manually. And luckily, with the help of the natural language processing. As everyone heard of, the ChatGPT comes out. We wanted to use the natural language processing in the contract reading, especially for the review. These are the backgrounds. So what we have been using, we tried different models for reading this contract document for us. Then we have chosen one model because this one has the highest accuracy, as you can see, compared to the other file method. It has the highest percentage of being accurate. We use the FIDIC 2017 version for the testing for different models now. One more slide for the technical part for the natural language processing. What we have done is we have used manual coding for getting the data set based on the FIDIC 1991, 2017, and some of the special conditions we have collected, and the different additions and versions. Also, we use NEC, JCT, AIA, different general conditions. Then we use them. We ask the researchers to do this coding based on a theoretical framework of the three functions or contract can play. And we have used this data set to personalize our own AI. And then use this AI to do the coding for us. And this now the final bit of the webinar is to share the distribution of the contract document and what we have found currently and what we are going to do in the future. So for the FIDIC, this is 1999 version. We want to have a look of the comparison among different versions of FIDIC. So for example, the Red Book, it has the 59% of the coordination and have a 34% of the controlling. And have a look of the EPC, for example. This version has higher percentage, which is 49% of the controlling, and 54% of the coordination. And this is the percentage of the adaptation, 5%. So this is having a look of the FIDIC template. It's the same year, but then it's across different versions. The other thing we have done is we want to have a look of the FIDIC document and try to discover its change over the time. So we're only focusing on the Red Book, and then we did the analysis for the Red Book from 1957 version, which is I have got this the hard copy from the ICE library in London Center. Then go to like 1977, 1987, 1999 version, and 2017 version. It's only looking at the Red Book, but then it's the change of the Red Book over the time. And possibly you can see from our result. Our conclusion is simply, with the time goes by, there are less control function clauses. Well, FIDIC is trying to put more percentage of the coordination function clauses in their general template. Luckily, we also presented our research results when the whole FIDIC group visited us in Tianjin last year. Then we have I have presented our research results with them, and we are very happy that because it's the same as their designing philosophy over the years to bring more collaborations among different stakeholders and parties in the construction project. This is another distribution of us. This is also the things we are trying to do at the moment. So in total, we have collected 826 contract documents from 88 different countries, as you could possibly see from the figure here. So these are the contract we have, the countries of the contract we have collected. And among these 626 contract documents, we have 506 of them are using FIDIC as general conditions. And together we have also collected the questionnaire for 203 with the questionnaire collected. So for example, we ask for the budget, for the cost, for the final performance, this kind of stuff with the data collected together with the contract document. These are the distribution of the three functions in the construction contracts that we have collected together with the questionnaire. These are the things we have done so far. Something we are trying to do is the first dimension is to improve the contract document with the automatic contract review system. It is to help with making the contract itself improved with a better quality. So might be more clear, less ambiguity, or if there are some important clauses missing, we will also make it up for them. The second thing we want to do is to simply to take the contract document as given, however, to proactively manage the construction project by using this given contract document. So there are two things we're trying to do. And these are the data set we have, 626 contract documents collected from 88 different countries. These are the data set we have. The other thing we are doing at the moment is trying to write a report. It's called the Global Use of Physics by the Chinese architecture, engineering, and construction firms. We are aiming to get it published by the end of May. We're simply trying to dig out and figure out what are the use or what are the conditions used by the Chinese main contractors across different countries, and also focus on the physics only. So that is all for the webinar from the content side. And we will go back to the Q&A, but then this is my email address if you want to connect or have any questions regarding to anything we have shared today. And there is, I believe there is a feedback for today's topic that, but then we will back to this feedback later. Any question or any discussions before? Let me check the chat first. Has there been a study or statistics available on how much extra it costs the clients to build due to EU considered risk assessment? I personally have not seen a report based on the real numbers or statistic data on the lack of the risk assessment. I personally have not seen that because it is harder to see, to make the causal relationship between, oh, this is the cost we have to spend because of the lack of risk assessment. I haven't seen that myself.
Yeah, so we can wrap it up here, and thank you so much. And everyone can could see your email if there is some other questions arising, and there will be a recording of this webinar available on all the social media as well. So we will continue this discussion later on the social media platforms. But yeah, so the survey will automatically appear after we end this Zoom meeting. So I encourage you to write down your comments there and rate this webinar so that it helps us to make the content more valuable for you all. So thank you once again, Yuting, and thank you all for joining in and listening.
Thank you.